Welcome to the Beyond Atheism podcast, with me, Nathan Alexander, and my co-host, Todd Tavares. This podcast moves beyond questions of God's existence to ask, what's next in a godless world? If you're enjoying the show so far, remember to like and subscribe, rate and review, and consider supporting us on Patreon. Beyond Atheism is produced and distributed by Atheist United Studios.
Turn on, tune in, and drop out. This was the famous phrase by Timothy Leary, addressed to the counterculture movement of the 1960s, in which he urged people to explore the nature of reality and the meaning of life, partly or entirely through the use of psychedelic drugs. But can psychedelics allow us to grasp deeper truths about life and reality, and even to experience transcendence? To talk about these issues and more, we're joined by Dr. Sharday Mosurinjohn. Sharday is an associate professor in the School of Religion at Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario. As a multidisciplinary scholar, her work draws from a wide range of topics, including religion, cultural theory, aesthetics, and mind-augmenting technologies ranging from AI to psychedelics. Her first book is The Spiritual Significance of Overload Boredom. Her new book project considers the psychedelic renaissance as an ethnogenic new religious movement in the long history of esotericism. My goodness, that's a mouthful, Sharday. Welcome.
From the name to the books, yeah. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you here.
Thanks so much, Sharday, for coming on. Really looking forward to talking with you. I guess the first question is, why psychedelics? Why are you so interested in this topic?
Well, I probably, first of all, have to do the Andrew Huberman style line, like, I wish to emphasize that any real or perceived advocacy on my part is completely separate from my research and teaching roles at Queen's University and service, but is nonetheless part of my desire to bring low cost to consumer information to the general public about weird metaphysics. Psychedelics is the most fun I've had in my career, the most interesting thing that I've worked on, and personally, like, non-ordinary experiences. That's where it's at.
So how did it start as a research project or a hobby or an interest? How did it become a focus of study?
I think where it started was listening to Paul Stamets's TED Talk about 10 or 12 years ago about fungi. And so, well, that's kind of like the proximate starting point in a way, because, really, in some sense, it starts with the DARE program back when I was a kid in public school. Do y'all remember the DARE program?
Yes,
They have the cops
absolutely.
come and drugs are bad. Yeah. And I really drank that Flavor Aid, and I was absolutely straight edge for the longest time. And it's a funny thing because I was craving aesthetically interesting, meaningful, intense experiences, but I had cut myself off from most avenues of doing that, not just with respect to, like substances and practices, but even socially. I didn't want to associate socially with people who did drugs. It seemed like the most morally bankrupt thing that anybody could do. But I nonetheless, or maybe tied up with that kind of prohibition that I'd set for myself, was really, really fascinated with the nature of mind and consciousness, and this whole sort of family of concepts that taps into whatever we're trying to get at with those words, and was kind of constantly experiencing some sort of low-level crisis of meaning, which is where my first book came from. And I found boredom as an idiom to describe this sort of warping of time and problem of meaning. And as I was working on that, I was thinking about different kinds of minds and phenomenology, and what is it like to be a me or in anything. And I was thinking about networked intelligence and network thinking and network living, because I wound up really talking a lot about what it is to live like in our present computational condition. And this was back in the early days of TED Talks, the cool days of TED Talks. And I listened to that, and I remember, the idea of this this agential and really kind of clever mycelium, the way that 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 the underground part that we don't notice of the mushroom fruiting bodies, like, it could move fast and it could communicate fast and it could communicate with other organisms and it could do all kinds of things. So I had that in my mind, and I had that resonance of that. Like he is fond of saying, Stamets and others are fond of making a comparison between the way that all fungal mycelia connect and communicate, and the way that psilocybin, the active ingredient in so-called magic mushrooms, does that for in human body minds, and between people who have had those experiences. So all of that was in there and percolating, and I was using some of those ideas in my book, The Spiritual Significance of Overload Boredom. I too often say overlord. I can't say overload boredom. I say overlord boredom. I don't know what that portends. And then the funny thing is, I mean, we started to get like the endless trip of Michael Pollan. Eventually his stuff came out, and just gradually it was definitely more and more in the air, if not the water. And then sabbatical became on the horizon. The book number 1 was done, and people started asking me, what are you going to do? And I started hearing myself say psychedelics. And it came true. I said it enough, and I lived into it, and then it became true. And I have oriented my whole research program around psychedelics, and it has been the most generative, fruitful, socially rich, collaborative thing I've ever done. There's so much kind of intersectoral and interdomain collaboration in that space.
Right. Yeah. And just to go back, you mentioned about, in school, like this sort of anti-drug message, and that really kind of like hit you hard or whatever. And I
Yeah.
wonder, maybe like we can ask about like your religious background, like if that in any way informed like your attitudes toward drugs and so on, and if there was a change that that changed your, like, a religious change that changed your attitudes.
Yeah. Well, yeah, this is so, it's so strange, because so I always say I would have made a really great zealot, like, for somebody. If anybody had recruited me, I would have been fabulous. I was this kind of, I mean, it would be nice to be able to say rebel without a cause, but I wasn't, particularly outgoingly rebellious. It was just like, well, I'll show you by forming strong moral standards within my own self, and like
Right.
withholding experiences from myself. And so I grew up without, but I think maybe that is because I grew up without being raised in just didn't feel like anything in particular. So what I was not was Irish Catholic. That's what my mom had been, and then the nuns beat her sufficiently that she ran away, and so therefore that is what I was not. And what I had was something like what does Megan Goodwin say? Something like it was Protestantism with the barcode filed off, or the serial number filed
Okay.
off. Sort of
Right.
like
Okay.
standard issue, liberal, mainline types of hegemonically Christian values floating around there, I'm sure, because that's, what would have been residual in my mom, I assume. Um, and I was really like I didn't have, there wasn't sort of a community identity in terms of like a neighborhood. There wasn't, extended family. There wasn't a kind of cultural identity. There wasn't a religious identity. There just kind of wasn't a lot to hang on to. So I think I started cobbling together a whole bunch of strictures for myself. And I just kind of, things that would be, I don't know, was this like virtue signaling for kids? I was like, oh, this, if I can internalize this message, then this will give me some kind of moral ground to stand on and maybe look down at my gifted
Right.
peers.
But it's
Yes.
neat that you have an awareness of that without, like, was your family church going? Were you sort of,
No, not at all.
you didn't have those rituals?
No. And I I remember for really no reason that I can point to, until I was probably at the end of my undergrad, I was vehemently anti-religious. I was so
Mm.
hostile. I mean, if the militant atheists had gotten me, I would have been great for them too.
It's
But
not too
nobody
late for
claimed
that.
me.
Yeah.
That's true. I haven't received my draft letter yet, but
Yeah.
there's still time
Yeah.
before I get back.
But it's a neat perspective, which I don't think we've heard much on this, like people who are raised without religion.
Yeah,
And
that's
because it
true.
seems
Yeah.
to be a very different flavor, and it's not one that we're very familiar with. But it's also interesting that you go from that upbringing to something that at least is studying. I mean, do you feel like you study religion as an outsider now? It's you.
Well, this is the most insider I've ever felt. So it was like, it was very much a sort of, I'm going to study this thing that I'm angry at. And the angle that I took for many years was, I am angry at religion, which, I mean, thankfully my master's supervisor pointed out is, you're sort of angry at mainline Protestantism, Sharday. And I was like, okay, I'll do an ethnography with
Right.
the United Church Women's Group, and I'll show them. And they were tremendously liberal, lovely people,
Mm,
about whom I could say nothing like truly critical.
mm,
And um, and and so that sort of vitriol that I had, that I didn't know where to place it, and I didn't know what it was, except that I thought, okay, I can say something about the fact that religion is tied up with sexism and capitalism, and those things are bad. So I'll follow that angle. And then as I got into the discipline of religious studies, which I came through sociocultural anthropology, I came through some philosophy of science stuff, I came through museology, I came through cultural studies, and sort of kept just like flirting with religious studies. And the more that I got into it as a discipline, the more that I was allowed to just be metaphysically curious in some respects, because there's lots of boundary policing too. And at that point it became like, I am not doing anything that can ever be mistaken for theology. Um, and but the more that I let my philosophical flag fly, the more that was also sort of more and more a tense boundary that I had to deal with. And so at this point, being that I am doing work in a community of psychonauts that I'm part of, it's the most insider that I've ever felt. And it still, comfortably falls outside the world religions, but like clearly I have embedded myself personally and professionally in something esoteric that as a religious studies scholar I can recognize is a kind of, insider position.
it's like, so is it religion adjacent, or like it has parts of religion? What's what's the best way to put that?
This is a really interesting thing because I keep having this experience in psychedelic communities where people will say things to me like, "Well, religion is disappearing, right? The churches are closing their doors, and so what's going to happen next?" And I say, "We're
Yeah.
doing it right
Yeah.
now. This isn't not that. If we look at what
Mm.
the functions are." And they go, "We need community." I'm like, "Yep, yep, we do." And that's what religions have done. Yep, and we're still doing it right now. And so, I mean, on the one hand, I could just say whatever it is amenable to study with the whole conceptual toolkit that we have as religious studies scholars. And then, in another way, I could say, yeah, I can firmly locate this in terms of religion in in the history of Western esotericism. So if I locate it as a form of esotericism, it is something that I guess it also, I think this also sort of fits with Lois Lee's definition of non-religion as something that gets its identity from being meaningfully different from religion. But in Walter Hanegraaff's sense of esotericism, it's the thing that is in that reject basket of both mainstream religion and mainstream science, but is informed by and always kind of in a tense relationship with
Right.
both.
Right. And what do we mean exactly by esotericism? Nailed it.
Esotericism, yeah. um, so the absolute simplest kind of soundbite definition is Hanegraaff's. It's stigmatized knowledge, or it's rejected knowledge. It's the wastebasket of knowledge. And who is it rejected by? Religion on the one hand and science on the other, or mainstream religion on the one hand, science on the other. What does it positively consist of? Very broadly speaking, magic, alchemy, astrology. Very broadly speaking. And those being histories that we can trace back to, like, say, with astrology, the earliest empirical practices of observing stars and like weather patterns in order to do practical things in the world. But that also takes on this kind of mysterious, predictive, esoteric dimension. Well, there I just used the word to define itself, but I said enough words at the beginning. Forgive me, right?
Yeah. No, I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so how does psychedelics like fit into that? Like, are there kind of
Ooh, yeah.
Almost like churches or institutional sort of things like that around psychedelics?
Oh man, there's so many ways. It's a damn smorgasbord right now. So one thing is that, yeah, there are these entheogenic NRMs.
Right.
That was the
Okay.
entheogenic.
Maybe that's another thing we should
Yeah.
define. I don't know.
Yeah. So entheogen means God generating.
Okay. Okay. I see. Okay.
And this is another, it's a synonym, or sometimes I think a euphemism for psychedelic, that I'm hearing increasingly lately. In fact, so usually it's being used specifically to point to religious uses or spiritual uses, like avowedly, by the people, avowedly religious or spiritual uses of psychedelics or other practices like fasting for a long time, or like praying with your head between your knees for a really long time, or holotropic breath work, things that can produce psychedelic experiences, but for religious or spiritual purpose. But I'm seeing some concept creep increasingly. So, for instance, I was at one of Kingston's psychedelic community events the other day, and this was one that was targeted towards students because we have a club at Queen's for psychedelics. So there was a PowerPoint, and it periodized the different eras in psychedelic history, with the most recent one being the entheogenesis era. And I thought, well, that's really interesting because that embeds the notion of God or religion into the very premise and what the era is about right now. But so that's entheogenic, and then it's just, there's always some kind of strategic branding problem or communication issue or angle. Psychedelic, it comes from like psyche or psyche, mind, soul, and delos, manifesting. So mind manifesting, and that was kind of coined in part to be able to not use the word hallucinogen. Just all of these things have baggage and get freighted and sort of need to. So that's yeah. So there are entheogenic churches popping up. And I was actually just talking on the Religious Studies Project podcast the other day about this one called the Church of Silomethoxin, which was started by two lawyers and a veteran in the States. And they are very savvily using the legal form of a church in order to provide legal protection to give a psychedelic as a sacrament. And the fella whose labor of love this is, he has, as a lawyer, helped establish over 30 other such churches. So there's a big entheogenic church movement. But then there's also just stuff like, you would not believe the number of psychedelic scientists who say to me, did you know that the root of all religion is psychedelic? And did you know that the mysteries of Eleusis were psychedelic? And that John was actually psychedelic? And then I go to my biblical studies friends and colleagues and I say, you know, they're saying this still. And they go, we debunked that 30 years ago. And we debunked that 60 years before that. And like, how many times? So there's that. There's also the fact that when psychedelic research got back up and running in the early 2000s, when Johns Hopkins obtained regulatory approval after the whole freeze due to Nixon's racist war on drugs, it was the mystical experience questionnaire that was at the heart of those first studies with psilocybin, saying psilocybin can occasion mystical experiences. And ththings like mystical experiences that are indistinguishable from religious experiences that are had in, you know, a church setting. And the mystical experience questionnaire was itself, it was derived. So what was used there was derived from what Walter Pankey used in the 60s, which was with the Marsh Chapel Good Friday experiment, where he, with approval, dosed Harvard divinity students in a Good Friday service in church, and then said, like, do these psilocybin occasioned experiences compare to sort of regular religion occasioned mystical experiences? That could be called the regular version of anything. And yes, they did. And so there's been this kind of use of religion to legitimate psychedelics all the way through. And that mysticism concept was itself taken from the perennialist Christian work of the philosopher Walter Stace earlier than that. And so there's just so much. But also in this space, I see so much interest in astrology, in magic, in past lives, in ancient aliens, in it just my friend Jacob used the metaphor of like a violently shaken snow globe of of esoteric references. It has everything.
Yeah. So, okay, so far what I've got is that there's a large community of psychonauts, some of whom are using psychedelics to create gods, which may or may not form into religion based on mystical experiences and spirituality. This sounds very different from what we typically understand as religion, and it seems like most mainstream religions disregard this. They're not interested in it. But spirituality is a universal part of religious experience. What is meant by spirituality, and how does this like mystical, esoteric phenomenon inform spirituality as an experience?
Yeah, good question. So that is really at the heart of what I'm tracking with these communities, because that part, the what does spirituality mean in this context, it's a discursive question that I can track through the literature and I can track through the way that people use it. And
well, I mean, so Sharday, for me, and I think this is true for most atheists, like it's almost like an alien concept. It's so weird. I don't have any functional grasp of it, and I don't know, Nathan. Do you have
Spirituality?
yeah? When you think of spirituality, do you even have like a sense of it? Is it a feeling? Can you define it?
No, I don't think I have a sense of it. It's hard to define. I mean, it's one of those things, like it's hard to define without defining it in a circular way, I think.
Right.
Wasn't there? Yeah, this is maybe
Is it
a
ineffable?
tangent.
Is that
No, but I remember
a
like
descriptor?
I think at some point you looked at the definition. There was something like, spirituality is like believing in spiritual things or something like that. I mean, I don't know. It's just some like totally circular definition.
well,
But yeah. Anyway, yes. Go
I
ahead.
can offer something that can help ground this. My dear friend and colleague, the brilliant Dr. Galen Watts, wrote his dissertation and first book on the spiritual but not religious in Canada. So SBNRs, millennial SBNRs, of which we are that generation. And I mean, I think what they said, so he actually hung out at institutions where he thought that this particular type of spirituality was really embodied, and he hung out at C3, which I believe did understand itself specifically as a church, but also Toastmasters and AA. Very interesting. And what they said had a lot to do with notions that I think will probably sound very familiar, like connection and meaning and personal expression, and the idea of, I think, sort of belonging in a responsive universe and things like that. The far more interesting element that I think Galen articulated was the historical context of this, that these notions come through like Wesleyan charismatic Christianity, through liberal and romantic modernity. So it's this twinned phenomenon of liberal and romantic modernity that carries what he calls, advisedly, because of its root in this kind of like, tent show situation with the strange warming of the heart, the religion of the heart. So yeah, I think that helps me historically ground where those elements of the discourse of like belonging and connectedness and all of these kind of good things come from. But yeah, in practice, I think one of the things that will be interesting is to see, does psychedelic spirituality actually show up differently than SBNR spirituality? Because the psychedelic spirituality, very much about belonging in a responsive universe, very much about connectedness, like with the fungal mycelium as the primary metaphor of connectedness, but very, very much about direct, non-ordinary experience, which I mean is similar to the kind of charismatic impulse of having some kind of a revelatory event, an event deemed revelatory in Tavesian language. But in this case, there's a lot of drawing on kind of archetypal language and imagery. There's a real interest, as there is in generally in esotericism, of authenticating things by going way, way, way back. So very ancient, yeah, wanting to refer to stuff like the Greco-Roman mysteries, but also wanting to, and this is where the psychedelic community is really reckoning with its relationship with learning from and appropriating indigenous traditional knowledges, because there's a lot of that way of framing things and like making contact with entities from those traditions.
And so these connections are really, really broad and mean in a lot of different ways. You can have like it's like the oneness across people, a connection to the universe, and a connection across time as well, going back to other systems of belief and other peoples historically as well. That's wow, that's a very broad notion of spirituality, and it helps me make sense of other ways people have used it. Is when psychonauts, I'm sorry, I just love that word and want to keep using it. When people draw these connections, how far back do they see the use of psychedelics going back in time to build these connections? Like, does it go back to prehistory? Is it only going back to the 60s? How far back does it go?
Yeah, there is this fella, a lawyer who did a classics undergrad, Brian Morescu, recently put out this book, The Immortality Key. And he claims that not only is one of the psychedelic community's kind of like foundational documents and a story that it often lives by, The Road to Eleusis by R. Gordon Wasson and Albert Hoffman, who synthesized LSD, and Carl Ruck, the classicist. Not only were they correct in saying that the Greco-Roman mysteries were psychedelic, Morescu wants to say that actually there were all these kinds of cults way before that, and wants to stretch it back, I think, into prehistory. And it's an interesting thing because that so I have heard that hypothesis filtered through scientists who have picked up that book because they're psychedelic scientists and they're interested in it, and they are unfamiliar with sort of humanity's standards of evidence. And as I'm reading that book, I'm seeing, okay, there's a lot that is front loaded here on evidence that my colleagues who work in the Greco-Roman antiquity area find spurious at best. And it dedicates many, many, many more chapters to going through a lot of detail about, particular artifacts found at particular museums, and telling a very sort of dramatic story about like how they don't want you to find out about this. Um, and I noticed that the form that takes is that it's like the farther away you get from that initial hypothesis, the more plausible it seems to become, because all of this so-called evidence is stacking up in between it. But if you remember that the hypothesis to begin with was on shaky grounds, according to the people who have dedicated themselves to those disciplines, except for a few kind of outlier figures, it is suspect. So there are claims that seem to be being taken seriously because it looks to people who are not in that area like there's a heck of a lot of evidence being marshaled for it, that it's very, 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 very old. And then I think, with traditions that are alive right now, then I think the imperative there is to take what they say about how long their traditions have been going with psychedelic sacraments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I wanted to ask, moving away from religion into more like secular and atheist people, I mean, I feel like probably there's benefit, I think, for atheists and secular people from psychedelics too, and perhaps more so. I mean, like, well, what is your thought about taking psychedelics and like getting a new picture of reality, but not ever kind of abandoning like a materialist worldview or something like that, but nonetheless, still like doing psychedelics and then coming away with like, you know, changed understandings of consciousness or something like that.
Yeah, this is something that I also want to work on, and I think I'm going to have to do this in more of a data-driven way, because anecdotally, it seems like a lot of people come through powerful psychedelic experiences. So I'm not talking about a microdose or a mesodose, but maybe a full acid trip or
something heroic.
Yeah, a heroic
Yeah.
mushroom trip or a full embrace of DMT, and they come back ontologically shocked. They come back changed. Integration is such a huge part of the psychedelic community because these profoundly strange metaphysical things seem to happen that you then have to incorporate into your model of how the world is. And so I am curious to know actually how many people do go through that level of non-ordinary experience and do not deem it religious, spiritual, supernatural, non-materialist. But then there's also stuff like, I don't know, like, are you a dual aspect monist? Maybe, maybe you think that there is one substance, but it sort of shows up in two ways. It's Shakti and it's Shiva. It's a particle and it's a wave. So, yeah, I don't know, but that really is something that we need to track, and I'm gonna.
Yeah, there's Sam Harris, who's one of the new atheists, but he's written about like his experience with psychedelics, and he has this funny article where he's talking about, basically he's kind of going through a list of like substances and things, and like talking about his daughters, like, like he would be really disappointed if they took up smoking, or like he would be horrified if they took up heroin, and so on. But he said, like, I'd be really disappointed if they didn't ever try psychedelics.
As a note, psychedelic exceptionalism is a real issue that psychedelics are the good kind of drugs, but let's keep the rest stigmatized. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's a real problem.
That's interesting.
But
Yeah.
go on.
No. I
It's,
mean, it was
Yeah.
just a note that yeah that the secular
Yeah.
person is kind of boosting them.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, he's ultra spiritual now, isn't he?
I think
Probably the
he's
psychedelics.
Probably the
I think he's
psychedelics.
trying to like reappropriate or whatever the word spirituality, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder how much of this is like that sort of like secularization of something that's seen as sort of ceremonial or sacred, right? Like you have this thing, it's part of a ritual, it's either a rite of passage or something connected to a bigger religious community project, and now it's been taken out of that. Are the psychonaut community, are they trying to rebuild around that notion, trying to sacralize it? Or is it something that's being left to be profane and meant to be secular and meant to be common?
Yeah, that's such a good question because there are, I think, it's not like countervailing forces, but there are forces from different directions that are maybe converging, such that you could say that one strand of what's happening is that this psychedelic renaissance or our entheogenesis era right now is a manifestation of the the weak secularization hypothesis that is just religion is changing in the face of modernity. Like clearly there are things of some sort of world building importance going on here. And it's not happening necessarily within the confines of the so called traditional world religions, but reckoning with the same kinds of existential questions and impulses regarding meaning and community. And so functionally, there's religious stuff happening, but it's being but it's secular, it's secularizing. And then another strand of what's happening is that there are particular ritual forms, particular substances. I mean, I think of ayahuasca is a really key example. I highly recommend checking out the work of Olivia Marcus, who's a medical anthropologist on shamanic tourism. She's done field work at retreat centers, ayahuasca retreat centers in Peru, and the tradition that is taken mainly in the ayahuasca space is specifically Shipibo. And as those practices, like that ayahuasca is typically done in a group setting led by somebody who hopefully is not only self-appointed as the shaman, but as far as I understand, ought to be a communal designation, like that is driven from the opinion of the community. But that form is what you see often transported into North America. So there is a secularization there, for instance. Mushrooms got popularized because Gordon Wasson inappropriately took pictures of the curandera Maria Sabina and published them in, I think it was Time, or his wife, Valentina Wasson, also, who was like a brilliant mycologist, also ran a similar story in another like national magazine. And so a lot of mushroom lore and practice and just knowing about them, how to identify them, all kinds of stuff. This is taken from the Mazatec tradition, which is, in both of those traditions that I've just mentioned, Mazatec and Shipibo are very much extant, but have been seriously damaged by tourism. Like they ruined Maria Sabina's life by overrunning her town. And so there's that. And then there's the fact that, and interestingly, I think because a lot of the researchers who have been at the forefront of the Renaissance period, so at Hopkins, Roland Griffiths nearly left his research career to go join an ashram. And Bill Richards is theologically trained. And there are a bunch of other people who actually come from some kind of theological training and then into this space. There's some sort of secularization of some kinds of internal maps of how things go, and bringing that into a clinical space and a research space and figuring out how to do that. And then there is also, even beyond those particular personalities, a recognition of that, whether it's, like, I don't think religion can be used to explain this. I think it's just that people do things in community. And those communities that some of these psychedelics have been done in historically could be described, or people want to describe them in religious or spiritual terms. And so then people go, oh, we've always done it this way. So if we're going to have the right setting to do it today, we need to make new rituals. And so you do see and this is another line of where there is the invention. It's like the Sunday assembly for the research lab. It's in the invention of secular rituals because they can't be too clearly referential to any given tradition. But I have seen still photos, for instance, of some of the settings where say psilocybin sessions would happen for trials or for research. And there's a Buddha statue, there's a candle,
Yeah.
there's a rose, and there's there's like Celtic knot tapestry or something. And so there is a ritualization going on.
Yeah, and it really tells the story because as you say, like something is being co-opted, right? It's being taken out of where it was, but it's being recreated in a different society that's secularized, that has this loss of meaning, that's being recreated, but it has the setting, meaning the conditions that you have a heavy trip in, and who you're with, and how it establishes the mindset. You have to create sort of a ritualized setting, and then you have a heavy dose. You go through it, and you get to meet God. That sounds pretty nice. And then and you come out of it with a spiritual awakening. That really does sound like it's almost like a secular road back to a sort of religious foundation.
And I
That's
think a
really
lot of
weird. It's a strange path that secularism can take. That's
yeah,
unexpected. Yeah.
yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah, and it really, regardless of exactly the terms that it's put in, it does come to this meaning crisis problem. And some people describe that by saying something more like, it's because we've lost religion or tradition. And some people put it more like, no, those changes are a function of a much broader, set of conditions that can produce, enemy and disconnection and fragmentation. But it comes down to, finding these different roads to experience something meaningful.
Right. So how do people get into it? This is we're at the end. All right. How do we do this?
Check out your local society or community, and I guess the disclaimer has to be made that there are a lot of good folks fighting the good fight for legalization. It's following the medical cannabis model. There are legal challenges up right now that it violates sort of basic rights that people have to not be able to make these decisions for themselves, and that there should be access. But so I have to say that because, of course, we can't encourage anybody to do anything illegal now, can we?
Yeah. Yeah. The legality also extends to research, doesn't it? Where it's still mostly illegal to conduct research on psychedelics, even for things like PTSD and any sort of psychological treatment.
There are, in Canada, two ways to obtain the Special Access Program and Section 56 exemption. And so the Special Access Program, I believe, is the way that most researchers who are able to do this are doing it. Like researchers who are, there are researchers who are collecting observation of naturalistic use, say through Quantified Citizen is a citizen science app where a bunch of, say, microdose studies are going on right now. But yeah, for researchers who are actually administering a substance, it's not easy, but it's possible. But it can be said that well, so I've got friends who are absolutely insistent that with the right set and setting, and so a sort of ceremonial one, and paired with breath work, cannabis can be just as psychedelic as anything else. And so, what I could say about, if you kind of want to do a toe dip into this space, is find a community that is doing that kind of group work, and you can have a perfectly legal experience in that way. But it seems like a lot of municipalities have a community, like a psychedelics community. And yeah, I mean, I think often about the fact that it not that long ago, and for friends of mine in this space who are of an older generation, to put that out there could have, maybe outed friends of yours, or, taken a community that was supposed to be very close knit and underground, uncomfortably above ground and exposed. So it feels weird in a way to say, like, go join your local community. Like, do so carefully and with respect, please. But
Yeah. Excellent. I think that's great advice. And and also keep it legal and safe. It's not just set and setting, it's making sure everything's safe.
that's right. Setting, supply, dose, integration,
Yeah.
all of that.
Um, we've got the lightning round,
That's
Sharday.
cool.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
should we make it? It's normally can a true atheist. Should we make it can a true psychonaut?
Yes, I
Yeah.
love that.
Oh,
All right.
okay.
See if it works.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it'll work. All right. Well,
Yeah.
the easy one. Do you want to start, Nathan?
Sure.
Okay.
So I guess we should just say these are just short questions,
Yes.
short answers, and so on. You can elaborate a little bit, but it's called a lightning round, though, I guess. Anyway, yeah. Okay. So can a true psychonaut believe in God?
I know a bunch who do.
Can
Okay.
can you can you have both? I mean we mentioned it earlier. Do you know people who've like gone through it and been like, yeah, I totally talked to God. It was amazing. And then been like, yeah, but God's not real. Can you kind of have that
Actually,
dual
yeah.
sense? Really?
Actually, yeah. Yeah, I do. I know a particular neuroscientist who maintains, I mean, he's gotten into some pretty wild polypharmacy, like many layers of many substances, and had some really, some experiences that were like, yeah, this shows something about how very profoundly weird reality is. But I don't know.
But yeah. So they met God, but maybe it wasn't God. Trickster God.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Well, can a true psychonaut attend church?
In fact, there's a whole phenomenon of psychedelic chaplains.
Wait,
So they could even
like Ken Casey's I forgot what they're called already. Man.
marry pranksters.
The Merry Pranksters, like where they were evangelizing acid. Is it like that?
Not evangelizing, but actually, maybe working on the staff of the institutions that would traditionally employ chaplains for the sake of integration, which is something between like a spiritual direction and psychotherapy, and and harm reduction. And there is an idea that actually, yeah, that mainline churches may want to adapt to this entheogeneration, by training or providing psychedelic chaplains. So yeah, I think yes.
Okay. Okay. Can a true psychonaut think we live in a computer simulation?
Oh. Hmm. I want the answer to that to be no.
Oh, to be
I,
no. Oh.
yeah, I want it to be no. I want it
Uh,
so that the I want the intel that people are bringing back to be like, yeah, don't worry, it's all very
That's
meaningful.
true.
Very connected.
That's a good point.
Yeah, does anybody endorse the simulation?
I mean, nobody comes back
hypothesis?
from a trip and says like, "Oh yeah, it's all programming." It's
Yeah, people don't tend to come back talking about computers, but there is this funny phenomenon of the gear elves, the gear elves
that's
and
with
the
DMT,
brain
isn't
surgeon,
it? The
yeah, with DMT. So there is like a mechanical flavor to some of these, the aesthetics of some of these, but I haven't heard like, yeah, it's all code, it's all binary.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
the gear elves. Man, can a true psychonaut believe in the transcendent? I guess, or do they have to?
Yeah. Well, I think a true psychonaut probably thinks that the transcendent is imminent.
Mm.
Oh,
yeah, man, that's
And
deep.
then they'll draw you an Ouroboros.
Right.
yeah. Okay. Can a true psychonaut play with a Ouija board?
Ooh.
Oh, yeah. Every Saturday night. Yeah. One hasn't been busted out at any parties that I've been at,
Okay.
but that is like esoterically on brand.
That's true.
Yes.
Yeah. Can a true psychonaut believe in an afterlife?
One of my favorite things on this that I've heard recently is a dear friend of mine said to me with a straight face, and then heard what he said and laughed hysterically, but continued to endorse the sentiment. It's hilarious that we think that people die.
Yeah.
It was so clearly circular in some way.
That's quite telling.
Yeah, it's a good one.
So is the answer yes?
Yes.
Okay. Or I guess if if no one dies, then I guess there's no afterlife.
Oh, thank you. That's actually a way more sophisticated answer. Cut out you saying that. Cut to me saying that. Well, clearly, if consciousness is fundamental, then life is ongoing with no serious interruptions.
We
ties into last
or
week.
just
Yeah.
our last episode, we talked about that. But
the persistence of consciousness, how it just can't.
Yeah, exactly.
End.
The self dies, but consciousness goes on. I think it's me. This one is more relevant for the can a true atheist part, but can a true psychonaut use the prayer emoji?
Frequently. Religiously. I'm picturing Jason Bateman in that episode of Arrested Development where he winds up on the cover of the magazine.
But the God that's created is it an active God? I've just thought of this because like there's no one to pray to, is there?
I think there's so many.
Really?
I think it's like, especially with the sort of desire to, like, there's a real pagan strain in that all of the natural forces are sort of personified.
Oh wow!
As gods.
Yeah,
and it's like, call in whoever you need or want.
I see.
And I'm not saying of course everybody is like this, and if you're working with any specific tradition, you're gonna have particular figures or concepts or gods or whatever.
It's not just the recreation of monotheism. It's not just the recreation of Abraham's God. It is like it's creating new gods all the time.
There's a lot of a type of perennialism that is like, and when in that story Moses saw the burning bush, that was psychedelic, and the God that spoke to him was, and so like everybody's God might be able to play in this story insofar as probably they access them through psychedelics, and probably it's just the many faces of some principle that transforms itself into many things.
Nice.
Much multiplicity.
All right. And finally, I think it's me. Can a true psychonaut think life is sacred?
I don't think I've met one who doesn't.
All
Interesting.
right, yeah. That's a beautiful place to end it, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
I don't think life
Um,
is sacred.
It's like,
yeah.
how do they define that? But it seems like
Yeah.
nice.
That's deep and important, and I've learned a lot. Thank you so much, Sharday.
Mm,
This has
thank
been
you.
fantastic.
Thank you so much. Thank you both for having me. This was so
Yeah.
much fun.
All right. That was Sharday Mosurinjohn. What were some of your takeaways?
Well, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. Well, one thing I finally learned what spirituality is. Like that's all right. I feel better. Like this idea of we're all connected to each other. We're all connected to the universe. That feels pretty good. Are you a spiritual person, Nathan? It's now that we have a good working definition.
No, I don't. I would probably say not. I mean,
Yeah.
it's like, I think the thing is, it can also just kind of kick the definitional can down the road. Like, then you get like, what does it mean to feel connected to the universe? I mean, I feel
Hmm. Yeah.
connected to. I mean, I realize that I'm part of the universe and I'm part of something that's way, way bigger than myself and so
Right.
on. But I don't know if I feel, yeah, like what does it mean to feel connection? I'm not sure exactly.
Right.
Yeah. What about you?
No, I mean, like in one of the things that got thrown around, like the SBND, like spiritual but not religious, or SBN.
Mm,
I can't even
SPNR.
spell
Yeah.
SBNR. The
Hmm.
like not in that sense, not in like a woo woo sense, but I mean, like it's baked into like humanism. Like you can have a materialist reality and still feel that connection. And it's weird things like I don't know. Have you ever seen that? Like I think it's a paradox, the checkerboard paradox, where if you start working backwards. So okay, here's how it works out. You get a checkerboard, 8 by 8, 64 squares, right? You start with the first square, and that's you, right? This is just a way to show that we're all interconnected. That's you. And then how many parents do you have? Okay, so the next square, that's two, and that's a generation. And then we go back another generation, and it's 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, blah, 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 blah. The problem is because it's exponential, you rapidly get to the point where it's more people than have ever existed. And how the hell do we get to the point where it's more people that have ever existed to produce one person? Right? That's weird. There's something so simple to the logic of it, but it gives us this conclusion that's so strange. It doesn't seem to make sense at all in less than, I mean, 64 generations would be about 1200 years, right? Working backwards. Let's say 1500 years. So that's and one of the logical answers that we come to is that we're all related, right? Like
Yes.
of
Right.
course we're all
Right.
connected. We're all related.
Yeah.
When you hear that somebody's related to Charlemagne or
Yeah.
Genghis
Yes.
Khan, it doesn't who gives a
Yeah.
shit? We're all related to Charlemagne and we're
Yes.
all related to
Yeah.
Genghis Khan. It doesn't matter, right? Like there's no getting away from it. After a certain point, you go back enough generations, with the exception of extreme genetic isolation, everybody's related. And like that, in that sense, I have this sense of connectedness, the sense of holism, the sense of, and the cosmic sense of like, yes, we are. I mean, we're a pale blue dot. We're all stuck in the same situation, whether we like it or not. We're all together. So I don't. You don't need drug. I feel you don't need drugs for that. They certainly help, apparently, but you
Right.
don't need it.
Yes. Yeah. I think
So that's one thing.
it's
I think that's a good
yeah.
takeaway. Is
Yeah.
there anything you found, Nathan?
Just to add on to that point, I mean, I think again, I don't know that I would say it's spiritual, but like even if we go beyond like how we're related to human, like other humans, like we're literally cousins with animals and birds and plants, like not like metaphorically, like literally cousins if you go far enough back. And so I think that's pretty cool, that we're all part of the same story of life. But again, I don't know that I wouldn't call it spiritual. Maybe other people would, and then maybe that's just a matter of the terminology people are comfortable with.
Yeah. Yeah. And I
Um,
mean, if it's more of a metaphysical sense, but you can get to that point without. the metaphysical, I feel.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
that's
I
one
agree.
thing.
Hmm.
Um, you know what struck me? You know what was weird that I hadn't thought about before? Is that like the idea that religion permits drugs, right?
Right.
Or like advocates it, which I'd
Yeah,
never
yeah.
really like explicitly considered before. Like religions do advocate explicitly ways to like alter your consciousness. And normally we think about like forbidding. And I mean, I don't know if I ever told you this one, but when I was in Korea, I had a student who didn't drink alcohol. Right? It's first of all like some good background to know is like Korea has a very strong drinking culture, and particularly in workplaces, you have to go out and drink as a group. It's kind of like socially mandated. And he's like, I don't drink. I'm like, why don't you drink? And he said, well, because I'm a Christian. It's like, well, that's kind of weird. Like the first miracle Jesus performed was turning water into wine. Like, why do you not drink? I'm not looking for a theological discussion, but like trying to get some insight into this kid. And he goes, oh, yeah, that turning water into wine, that was really grape juice. What the? That's so weird. But the thing was, it's like that allowed him to escape what the rest of society does, right? And we have it. And the flip side is, of course, that Christianity permits it. It's very permissive with drinking. And in a lot of ways, we see that like that is a part of Western cultural legacy, right? Like we have very strong drinking from very strong Christian communities, whereas in Islam, you don't have that, right? And one way to look at it is like it's banned in these, but in another way, it's like it's permitted, it's allowed, it's encouraged. I mean, it's a sacrament in Catholicism. So if we think about it that way, one of the things that we find is that like the state kind of, when we think of like governmentality, the government is really reinforcing this sort of civic legacy, right? This religious power that's been passed down, even if it's not good by the way that we measure things by the government. Government typically, I mean, one of the things that we discuss in political theory is like the harm principle, the idea that you permit things that don't cause harm to other people. There is no way you can look at something like alcohol and say it does not harm other people. It's very, very clear that it does, but we have it where it's passed down, right? We know that this is what the state does, right? It's permitting this, it's enforcing this social permission. It also allows businesses, things like opiates, pharmaceuticals. But when we start pushing it into this drugs section, these psychoactive drugs, psychedelic drugs, places where we don't find any harm, and cannabis is included in this category, there's a break with this legacy, with this religious legacy. It wasn't religion that permitted it. It wasn't businesses that were permitting it. It's it's just democracy, right? It's just people who have for a long time worked to legalize cannabis. And then it happens in the US. I'm not sure about the Canadian case, but almost every state in the US that's legalized marijuana, almost all of them did it through voter initiatives. There's only like one or two cases where state legislators did it. So the government, it's not the government rationally looking at a list of drugs saying, okay, what's harmful, what's dangerous, what's bad. It's got nothing to do with it. Instead, it was people going out, voter initiatives, saying this is what we want. And this is to bring it full circle back to the atheist project. When we go out and we say, okay, what does it look like if we have a government that's divorced from religion? What do we do that disrupts a religious legacy, that imposes culture on us, imposes the rules on us? This is a case where we're doing that, right? This is a blank slate. We don't have a religious legacy that endorses psychoactive drugs. But we know socially they're not harmful, right? Compare opioid deaths, tens of thousands. I mean, it's really ridiculous in the US, right? The tens of thousands of opioid deaths every year, um, which were like artificially created in laboratories, compared to psychedelics that have killed literally no one over
Yeah,
their
right.
entire history.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, one interesting thing is like, and I think we talked a little bit about this with her, like that sometimes you can even make a religious freedom argument for legalizing certain like psychedelics or whatever, which is almost um yeah, almost like a
Yeah.
kind of a reverse case where
Yeah,
but I yeah.
but atheists aren't going to do that, are they?
No, but I think she was talking about like these sort of if I recall correctly, like particular churches. Well, I mean, the thing is, what does it mean to be a church? Like church kind of based around psychedelic drugs or something, and claiming that religious freedom. I mean, it's sort of like this, like the Satanic Temple using that
Yeah.
idea of
Yep.
religious freedom. Um, I
Yeah,
don't know
but
whether that's a good
here's the
path to
flip
go
side of
down,
that,
but yeah,
Nathan. Like with marijuana, nobody did that, and we don't need to,
that's true.
right? And if we're going to be atheists, we can just we can say, yeah, we can do that, or we can just say, no, we like this. We think about it rationally. We measure the harm versus like the risk versus the reward. We think the outcome is totally okay, and
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
yeah.
I
And
agree.
it's a weird thing, right? Because we're getting rid of that grounding that used to be there. Jesus drank wine. We should be allowed to drink wine, right? Our elders ate peyote. We should be allowed to eat peyote, right? It's an important part of a ritual or a rite. So, I mean, so one of the things I find, which I hadn't thought of, is that like when we think of things as like an atheist culture, an atheist society, what does an atheist world look like? We don't need to do that, right? We can wash away these things that religion says are good to do or you need to do socially. I think that's
Yeah,
powerful. Yeah.
yeah, I think yeah, um, and I think there is more of a focus on like rationally considering laws versus like such and such thing is just bad. It's just immoral. That's just the way it is. Like even if it's not even religiously, like there's no like religious prohibition on psychedelics or something like that. But it's more like drugs are bad and like why? Well, they're just bad. Okay, like they're just immoral. Like they should be illegal. But rather than like actually sort of thinking about like what is the harm versus benefit or so on, which
Yeah.
is a
Yeah.
more rational way to approach it, I think.
Yeah. And
Um,
I mean, like, this isn't to say that as an atheist or a non believer, you need to endorse psychedelics. You need to go out and do them. It's just that yeah, that we have to think about these things rationally with like and look at things like we are looking into an abyss, right? Like, whoa, where do we want to put the ground? Do we want to, right? Like we get to make these decisions. Take it seriously. Become interested in and invested in it, whether or not you're doing it. So Nathan, are you gonna start hitting up the mushrooms now?
well, there is. I never done psychedelics before, but there is here in Ottawa. There's a ton of cannabis stores, but I saw on my street. There's like I think there's like a dispensary or something for like magic mushrooms. I'm not sure.
Really?
Like yeah, I'm not sure. Like I assume it's illegal, but it's like it's one of those things where it's probably becoming sufficiently like widespread that people will look the
Mm.
other way. Maybe I'm not sure. So
Mm.
maybe we'll see. We'll see. I don't know. I'll
All
edit
right,
that
we
apart
expect
out.
you to report back in the next episode
For
about what
yeah,
happened with the magic mushroom
yeah,
dispensary.
yeah. All right. Yes.
Better not just be like cremini mushrooms or oyster
No,
mushrooms.
it's got psychedelic artwork and stuff on the building. So obviously, yeah,
Maybe they just colored. Did they put food dye on the mushrooms?
yeah, right, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm.
I don't think I'm not going to be smoking DMT
No.
anytime
Okay.
soon.
Yeah.
But,
Okay.
uh,
That sounds like a good thing, probably.
yeah,
Um,
but if anyone's interested, you can follow Sharday's work. We'll have some links below. What else? We should plug her. What else can we say about Sharday other than she's a
um,
fantastic scholar doing incredible work?
so her book is called the spiritual significance of overload boredom. I almost said overlord as well.
Overlord.
Um, and check
It's
that
good.
out. And she's got she's working on a new book on psychedelics, which is mostly what we talked about. So
Mm,
keep an eye on her website and follow her on social media if you
yeah.
want to
And
learn
I'm
more.
sure if you have fantastic stories, she would love to hear from you. That's always a
Yes.
question for, it's always an issue for people doing research in that field.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Get in touch.
Otherwise, what do we,
How
I
your
don't know, Nathan, do you have
ADHD.
anything to plug? What's going on?
No, nothing to plug. Follow me on Twitter, I guess. Nath G Alexander.
Well,
I'm
it still exists.
I really have I think I sort of have not being there anymore, but you never know, so it's still there. I'm
So do
also
it a
on
lot so he notices.
Mastodon.
Push the buttons really
Yeah,
hard.
yeah. I guess
Yeah, so
that's it.
check that
Oh,
out.
yeah.
Nathan's there. As always, like and subscribe if you like what you hear. That's the easiest way. Of course, if you have extra money hanging around, we'd love to have you throw some our way and become a patron. Big support to our patrons. We love you guys so much. Thank you. And remember, even for $5 a month, you get some of the behind the scenes. You get the extra talk, which is a little looser, a little sloppier, more swearing, I think. And
Yeah.
that's totally worth the money too.
Yeah.
That's the best part.
Yeah.
And yeah, be sure to check out. Remember, we are part of Atheist United Studios. Check them out. They're our partners on the network. And Atheist United, if you're in California looking for a good time, sign up. They're always out there. They're always doing stuff. They're looking for members, looking for people to join the project. And that's it from me, Nathan. Any last words?
Thanks again, people, for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Awesome.